Welcome to Module 2 of our training on teaching mixed levels. In this module, we'll explore practical differentiation strategies for whole class instruction. In Module 1, I introduced you to the idea of adapting a single off-to-class lesson for a whole class using differentiation. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. We'll talk about choosing the right lesson, using in-lesson differentiation techniques like tiered questioning, scaffolded practice, and varied task complexity. When choosing a lesson for whole group instruction, it's important to consider the range of proficiency levels in your class. Do you have mostly lower-level students? A mix of beginners, pre-intermediate, and intermediate students? A mixture of all levels? Most importantly, what is the lowest proficiency level you'll be teaching? Is it absolute beginners? More advanced beginners? The reason this is important is because whole class instruction is typically not effective when your lowest proficiency students are absolute beginners or newcomers. These students might also be referred to as entering, pre-emergent, or pre-beginning. These students need more focused attention and direct instruction, so we'll talk about other strategies that are best for them in other videos. Whole class instruction works best when the lowest level in your class is at least beginner or upper beginner. Sometimes this is referred to as emerging plus, beginning plus, or early intermediate, or basic level proficiency. When selecting a lesson, it's helpful to choose a level closest to the level of your least proficient students. For instance, if your students range from beginner to upper intermediate, select a beginner lesson. If your students range from pre-intermediate to advanced, select a pre-intermediate lesson. This allows you to increase complexity as needed, which is much easier than simplifying an overly complex lesson. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can differentiate two kinds of lessons: an advanced beginner speaking lesson from the Speaking for Newcomers category, and a step-by-step lesson at the upper beginner level. Let's start with our speaking lesson on daily routines. This lesson is designed for advanced beginners, but we can easily adapt it for a mixed level class. For this warm-up activity, we can use the strategy of tiered questioning. For my students at a beginning level, I can use the questions on the slide: who is the person in the picture? What time do you think it is? What is she doing? And I could also add a question like, how would you describe this person's morning routine to a classmate? For the intermediate level students in my class, I might ask, what is this person getting ready for? Why do you think that? I can even include my advanced students with a question like, how might this person's routine differ on the weekends? Why? Another strategy you could use here is scaffolded practice. Use the text tool on a slide to add word banks, sentence starters, or sentence frames like I have here. This can help students to engage with the content no matter their level. Let's take a look at another type of exercise. On these slides, students are asked to read and repeat a conversation, act it out, change roles, and then create their own dialogue about their own routine. To scaffold this activity, you might have beginners work with a partner, use the model, and provide sentence frames and word banks. For more intermediate students, you might ask them to write the dialogue, including at least 3 question words or 2 reasons why. For your advanced students, you might change the verb tense of the exercise and make it more challenging by asking them to write about what they used to do when they were younger. You could then provide sentence frames like, when I was, I used to, and I would. Another great strategy for mixed level classes is varied task complexity. Since this is a lesson for beginners, you can have them match the actions to the pictures as it says on the slide. Your more advanced beginners could make a short sentence about each picture using the correct vocabulary from the list, while your intermediate students write sentences about what happened in the pictures yesterday, which would help them practice the past simple. Make the task even more advanced by asking students to make an excuse for why the person in each picture didn't do what they were supposed to do this morning. They can practice providing explanations with the word because. Next, let's take a look at an exercise where students are asked to make a new conversation using the words on the slide. For your more advanced beginners, you could adjust the length of the exercise or add in another verb tense, like the past simple, so students can say what they did this morning, for example. For intermediate students, you could extend the conversation and ask them to pretend that they overslept. Ask them, how did your routine change? To make the exercise more advanced, ask students to imagine their life 10 years from now. Ask them what their daily routine would look like if they had, for instance, their dream job. For slides with grammar instruction and grammar practice, you might use the exercises just as they are. You can increase the difficulty by asking students to, for instance, unscramble the words and answer the questions using creativity. Or for your most advanced students, you might have them create their own scrambled sentences or exercises for their classmates to complete. Now, let's take a look at how you can differentiate a step-by-step curriculum lesson at an upper beginner level when your class includes students at a variety of proficiency levels. Beginner level questions might include, how many children are in each picture? Or, can you name 3 family members? Other questions might call for short, simple answers with structures that students are familiar with. You can combine this with scaffolded practice techniques for extra support. Use the embedded text tool on the slide to add labels to the image, such as father, mother, son, or other family descriptors. You can also add sentence frames to the slide to help students with those descriptive structures. Intermediate level questions like, how would you describe the relationships, or what similarities and differences do you notice, require students to answer with higher levels of detail or to use comparative structures. You can also scaffold this exercise by providing sentence frames to help students produce those comparative expressions. Challenge your most advanced students with more abstract lines of questioning, like what assumptions might people make about these families based only on the photos? Here's another slide with speaking prompts that work well with tiered questioning. Beginners can answer questions on the slides, and you could add questions like, how many people are in this family? What colors are they wearing? Intermediate level students might be ready to hypothesize or infer. You could ask, what do you think the occasion might be for the large family gathering? Or what emotions or moods do you notice in the picture, and why might they be feeling that way? Advanced students might be ready to compare and contrast this family to their own family, or to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of having a large family. There are also many ways you can incorporate the technique of scaffolded practice for a slide like this. Scaffolds for lower proficiency levels might include sentence frames or word banks with family member terms and simple adjectives. Intermediate level scaffolds might include more complex sentence starters, like, in my family we enjoy, or my blank used to blank, but now blank. Finally, don't be afraid to provide scaffolds even for your more advanced students to help them increase the complexity of their responses. You might use comparative structures like compared to other families, or in contrast, or unlike other families. This can help students to bridge the gap between where they are and the more complex language you want them to be able to use. Now, let's take a look at how you can scaffold the listening activities in a step-by-step lesson. First of all, you can pre-teach key vocabulary before listening to an audio exercise. For example, here, before you play the audio, you can show students maps of the United States, Turkey, and Italy, including the cities mentioned in the audio. Illustrate the concept of siblings, including the idea of oldest and youngest. Another scaffold you could provide is showing the comprehension questions on the next slide before listening to the audio. This helps students learn the skill of listening for specific information. Another scaffold for listening activities is pointing to and labeling the slide while listening to the audio. Now that we've discussed how to scaffold listening activities, let's look at some extension activities for your more advanced students. They could take notes while listening and then retell the main points to a partner, or they could also write their own script using this one as a model and then record it themselves. Step-by-step lessons always include grammar instruction and grammar tasks. For these types of activities, you can also use scaffolding to support students of all levels. These activities ask students to change the sentences to the past simple and to complete the sentences using the correct forms of be. For beginners, perhaps you provide a verb chart with forms of be to make this more accessible. For your students who need more of a challenge, vary the task complexity by having them create questions in the past simple, using the sentences on this slide. For example, he's an architect becomes he was an architect. And then, was he an architect? Or, students could create the questions, then change them from positive to negative or vice versa. An example, they're on the train becomes they were on the train, which then becomes weren't they on the train? Similarly, he was a good teacher could become wasn't he a good teacher? Your most advanced students might be ready to write their own quiz with tricky was/were usages for their classmates. You can also adapt the complexity of reading tasks in step-by-step lessons. Simplify this task by asking students to match fewer events to their corresponding dates, allowing them to spend more time and focus on fewer sentences while still maintaining the rigor of the activity. You might also allow students to start with a partially completed timeline. For a more advanced activity, ask students to create additional life events that might fit into the timeline. Finally, the production activities that appear at the end of step-by-step lessons are great candidates for scaffolded practice. The teacher notes that come with each slide offer some options for scaffolding and tiered questioning, as you can see here. In addition to those, you could provide sentence frames or word banks to reduce the language load for students at lower proficiency levels. If you need additional ideas for sentence frames you can use when you teach off-to-class lessons to mixed-level classes, make sure you download our free resource, Versatile Sentence Frames for Differentiation. It features reusable sentence frames organized by language function that you can use with any off-to-class lesson. Now you know how to choose a lesson for whole class instruction, how to use tiered questions, how to scaffold and extend practice activities, and how to adjust task complexity for your mixed level classes. Until next time, happy teaching!